The story began by introducing a young boy named George Edward Foreman, who was noticeably the biggest of his four siblings. His family was living deep in poverty, a reality made clear every night when his mother had to meticulously divide their meager food into 5 equal portions so everyone could eat. Despite their hardship, she taught her children to be grateful and to have faith. But as the family prayed over their small meal, young George's expression was one of pure annoyance. For a boy with an empty stomach, God felt like nonsense. This simmering anger often boiled over at school, where he was constantly belittled by his classmates and even his teacher for being poor.
Who wants to read out loud? Jason, take us away.
One day, sick of the relentless teasing, he finally snapped, beat up another kid, and walked away from school for good. 7 years down the road, an 18-year-old George, lacking a diploma and prospects, had resorted to petty crime to get by. His career as a mugger came to an abrupt end one night when he tried to rob a man who turned out to be an undercover police officer.
Surprise, boys!
He managed to escape by the skin of his teeth, a close call that scared him straight. Shaken, he was walking home when he saw a TV advertisement that would change his life. It was for the Job Corps, a government program that took in dropouts, offering them a place to live, job training, free meals, and a monthly salary. Seeing it as a golden opportunity and his only way out, he told his mother, who gave him her blessing. Her parting words were firm. He was not to come home until he had become a success. This wasn't a threat, but a vote of confidence that lit a fire in him. The next morning, after enrolling in the program, George arrived at his new dormitory room. As he unpacked his bag, he was touched to find that his mother had packed him a brand new pair of shoes, along with a small motivational note. His initial enthusiasm for this new chapter was quickly challenged during a break when he realized his new shoes had been stolen. At lunch, he spotted them on another kid's feet. The thief, realizing he'd been caught, made a run for it. Not willing to let go of his mother's gift, George gave chase. The pursuit ended at the thief's dorm room, but the locked door was no obstacle for George, who punched right through it. He grabbed the kid and was about to drop him out of a second-story window when a Job Corps officer named Doc intervened, breaking up the fight. Because of the commotion and the damaged property, George was on the verge of being kicked out of the program. In the car, as Doc was driving him to the bus stop to send him home, George pleaded desperately, explaining that this program was his last and only hope to make something of himself. Seeing the raw desperation in the young man's eyes, Doc had a change of heart. He recognized George's incredible raw power and his deep-seated anger and made him an offer. Instead of getting kicked out, he channeled all that rage into boxing. He was sure that with a body and strength like George's, he could become a successful boxer. Even though he knew nothing about the sport, George agreed instantly, seeing it as his only way to stay. His first time in the ring was a lesson in humility. After Doc got him fitted with some boxing gear, George stepped in for his first sparring session. Despite his muscular build and immense strength, his complete lack of technique made him an easy target, and he was soundly beaten. Annoyed and embarrassed by the laughter from the other guys in the gym, he stormed off to the locker room. Doc followed him and tried to calm him down, giving him his first real piece of boxing advice. He told George that his strength was useless if he couldn't control his mind and master the fundamental. The real fight, Doc explained, wasn't just about punching. It was about controlling his anger and focusing it. A lesson that marked the true beginning of George Foreman's journey from a brawler to a boxer. Week after week, George poured everything he had into his training with Doc. A month later, he had a rematch with the same boxer who had easily beaten him in his first sparring session. This time, the tables were turned. With vastly improved technique backing up his raw power, George dominated the fight, winning easily with a hard-hitting punch. After the match, high on his victory, George showed Doc a boxing magazine with Joe Frazier on the cover, declaring that he wanted to be a rich and successful champion just like him. Doc, ever the steady mentor, tempered his students' enthusiasm with a dose of reality, explaining that to even get a shot at the World Championship, he'd have to prove himself first. He suggested George dedicate himself to a full year of grueling training to properly prepare for the amateur circuit. After a year of relentless work, George's journey took him to the 1968 Olympics in Mexico City. In the heavyweight gold medal match, he found himself in a tough spot, continuously cornered by his more experienced opponent. But George's sheer determination and relentless power eventually wore the other man down. He turned the fight around and won the match, becoming an Olympic gold medalist. He returned home from Mexico a hero, and the sight of her son's success filled his mother with an incredible sense of pride. A few days later, Doc arranged for George to go to Oakland, California for more advanced professional training. At the airport, he had a chance encounter with a beautiful young woman named Paula, and after a brief chat, they exchanged phone numbers before heading their separate ways. In Oakland, Doc introduced George to a seasoned former professional boxer who would take over his training. His new coach immediately warned him that the pro level was a whole different ballgame and that he needed to be mentally prepared for the brutal road ahead. The next few years were a blur of success. George made his professional debut in 1969, and his relationship with Paula grew closer until they eventually got married. In the ring, he was an unstoppable force, racking up win after win, never losing a single professional match. His undefeated streak finally earned him what he'd always wanted, a shot at the World Heavyweight Championship against his idol, Joe Frazier. The championship fight was a stunning upset. Despite being the newcomer, George's overwhelming power was too much for the reigning champ. He won the match decisively, becoming the new heavyweight champion of the world. He celebrated his victory by throwing a huge party for his old friends from the Job Corps, including his buddy Desmond, who was immensely proud of his friend's success. In a gesture of loyalty, George hired Desmond on the spot to be his personal assistant and accountant to help manage his newfound fortune. But as the saying goes, the head that wears the crown is a heavy one. Shortly after his win, George saw the legendary Muhammad Ali on TV, who publicly commented on George's boxing style and then cheekily challenged him to a duel. The provocation immediately got under George's skin. Amidst his professional success, his personal life began to show cracks. At a birthday party for his young daughter, his whole family gathered to celebrate his incredible journey from poverty to abundance. While everyone was laughing and enjoying the feast, George noticed his wife, Paula, seemed distant and sad. His transformation into a wealthy and famous celebrity had changed him, and she felt he no longer loved her the way he used to. The growing distance between them finally erupted into a major argument after the party, which ended with Paula asking for a divorce. A year later, in 1974, George accepted Muhammad Ali's challenge. The Rumble in the Jungle in Zaire was one of the most anticipated fights in history. Round after round, George relentlessly attacked, throwing his powerful punches, but Ali masterfully defended himself, absorbing the punishment. George, by constantly being the aggressor, began to tire himself out. In the 8th round, seeing that George's punches had lost their power, Ali launched a brilliant counterattack, knocking George out for the first time in his professional career. Just like that, his undefeated streak was over, and his championship title was gone. 6 months passed, and a deeply disappointed George was desperate to restore his reputation. He staged a bizarre exhibition match where he took on 5 different boxers at once. Though he easily defeated all of them, the spectacle didn't win back the crowd's respect. They spent the entire fight chanting the name of Muhammad Ali, who was sitting in the audience watching. Filled with rage and frustration, George challenged Ali to a rematch right then and there, but Ali, ever the showman, just smiled and coolly refused, leaving George stewing in his own defeat. Back in the locker room after the frustrating 5-man fight, Doc tried to encourage his student, but George's professional woes were quickly overshadowed by a real-life crisis. He received a message with devastating news. His younger sister was in critical condition following childbirth. He immediately rushed to the hospital. At the hospital, after his mother explained the dire situation, George was told that the only thing that could save his sister now was a miracle from God. Overwhelmed by a feeling of helplessness, George, the man who had long since turned his back on faith, fell to his knees. For the first time in his adult life, he sincerely prayed, crying and begging God to take his life instead of his sister's. He prayed non-stop through the entire night, a desperate solitary vigil. The next morning, his mother woke him with the news. His sister and her new baby were both stable and healthy. George was stunned. To him, it was an answered prayer, undeniable proof that God was real. This spiritual awakening profoundly changed him. 3 years later, in a fight against a boxer named Jimmy Young, George seemed distracted, still wrestling with the trauma of his loss to Ali, and he ended up losing the match. But the real fight happened after the final bell. In the locker room, his body suddenly felt strange, and he was overwhelmed by a powerful spiritual experience. He heard a mysterious voice calling his name and felt as if he had died and been reborn right there on the locker room floor. This incident solidified his new path. Shortly after, he made a decision that shocked the boxing world. He told Doc he was retiring from the sport for good. He was going to become a preacher and dedicate his life to serving God. Doc, though disappointed to see such a talent walk away, could do nothing to change his mind. A few days later, George was preaching on a street corner when he met a kind and beautiful woman named Mary. They struck up a conversation, which blossomed into a relationship. 7 years down the road, by 1985, George had fully embraced his new life. He was the dedicated pastor of his own small church, happily married to Mary and a father to 2 children. One morning, a news report about 2 kids being arrested for stealing caught his attention. It reminded him of his own impoverished childhood, where he had to steal just to get by. The memory sparked a new calling in him. He decided to open a youth sports center to educate and help poor street kids, giving them the guidance he never had. With the help of his old friend Desmond, George bought a building and officially opened the George Foreman Youth Center, personally training the kids who came looking for a purpose. But a few months later, the lights went out in that building. A check with the bank revealed a devastating truth. His entire fortune from his boxing career was gone. In fact, he was deeply in debt. That night, a furious George tracked Desmond down at a bar and demanded to know what had happened to his money. A tearful Desmond confessed that he had lost every penny in a series of fake investments and bad business deals. The anger drained out of George, replaced by the crushing weight of disappointment. He tried to raise money to save his youth center, taking jobs as an advertising model and selling autographed souvenirs to his fans, but it was just a drop in the bucket compared to the debts he owed. The day finally came when the bank was forced to foreclose on the sports center. From a distance, George watched heartbroken as the kids were turned away, left with nowhere to go. That sight was the final push he needed. He went back to the one man who had always believed in him. He found Doc and explained his situation, begging his old mentor to train him again for an improbable comeback. Seeing the noble purpose and fierce determination in his former student's eyes, Doc agreed, but with one major condition. First, George had to lose the massive amount of weight he had gained since his retirement. With a new fire in his eyes, George happily agreed, and his legendary comeback journey began.
Hey, George, take it easy, man. You're gonna have a heart attack.
A few months later, George's comeback began, but it was anything but glamorous. His first few fights showed that while the power was still there, age had taken its toll on his stamina, and he was easily defeated by younger, quicker opponents who wore him down. But George, fueled by a new purpose, refused to give up. For 2 years, he endured a grueling training regimen with Doc, pushing his older body to its absolute limits. By 1987, the hard work began to pay off. In a crucial official fight, despite being overwhelmed in the early rounds, George's determination and experience allowed him to stand his ground, and he eventually won. That victory was the turning point. News of his improbable comeback went viral, and he continued to fight his way up the ranks, winning match after match until, against all odds, he had earned another shot at the World Heavyweight Championship. On that fateful day, he stepped into the ring to face the young, powerful, and reigning heavyweight champion Michael Moore. For much of the fight, it looked like George's incredible run was about to come to an end. He was consistently cornered and outboxed by his much younger opponent. In the corner before the 10th round, a worried Doc, seeing his fighter taking a beating, suggested he stop the match to protect himself. But George, full of a calm and quiet confidence he had never possessed in his youth, simply shook his head and signaled that he was going to win. When the bell rang, he came out with a renewed sense of purpose. As if he had a divine second wind, he patiently waited for his opening, landed a few precise punches, and then, with one final powerful blow, he knocked Michael Moore out cold. The entire arena was stunned into a moment of disbelief. George, the old boxer who everyone had written off, was once again the heavyweight champion of the world. But instead of a wild, ego-driven celebration, the new champion knelt on the ring and thanked God for his strength. He then rose and shared a heartfelt, emotional hug with Doc, the coach who had never given up on him. With that single, miraculous punch, George Foreman had cemented his legacy, becoming the oldest boxer in history to ever win the heavyweight title, proving that with faith and determination, anything was possible.